The wind howled like a wounded animal, clawing at the tiny wooden house at the edge of town, as snow swallowed the road whole and the night turned white with fury. Inside that fragile home, a 72-year-old widow wrapped in a faded wool shawl stood by her frosted window, watching 15 stranded bikers stumble through the storm toward her porch, unaware that by morning, her quiet life would never be the same again. If you believe that kindness can change the world, even in the smallest ways, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that second chances and simple goodness still exist. Martha Hale had lived alone for nearly 12 years. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away one winter not so different from this one. The snow had been heavy that night too, the roads blocked, the ambulance delayed. Ever since, winter carried a silence that pressed against her chest. Her small wooden home sat at the edge of Pine Ridge, a quiet town tucked between hills and endless forest. Most people had moved closer to the highway over the years, leaving her cottage one of the last houses before the long stretch of mountain road began. She survived on a modest pension and the vegetables she grew in warmer months. Her hands were thin and lined with age, but they were steady. Every morning she rose before dawn, brewed weak tea, and fed the birds that gathered outside her porch. The townsfolk respected her but rarely visited. To them, she was the gentle old woman who smiled at everyone and asked for nothing. That evening, the weather report had warned of a severe snowstorm, but Martha had seen many winters and believed she was prepared. She stacked extra firewood, lit the fireplace, and placed a kettle of soup on the stove. By nightfall, the wind intensified, turning the world outside into a blur of white chaos. The power flickered once, twice, then held steady. She whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Then she heard it, a distant rumble beneath the roar of the wind. At first, she thought it was thunder. But the sound grew louder, mechanical, uneven. Engines struggling. Headlights pierced the swirling snow like lost stars. Through her window, she saw them, motorcycles, their riders bundled in leather and heavy gear, pulling over as the storm overwhelmed them. One by one, the engines died. 15 figures stood stranded in the freezing darkness, miles from the nearest motel. Martha's heart tightened. Pine Ridge did not see many bikers, and when it did, people tended to lock their doors. Leather jackets, tattoos, heavy boots, they carried a reputation that often arrived before they did. She remembered overhearing townspeople once say that bikers brought trouble wherever they went. But as she watched them struggle to steady their bikes against the wind, she didn't see trouble. She saw human beings shivering in a storm that did not care who they were. Her mind argued with her heart. She was alone. She was elderly. There were 15 of them. Yet another memory surfaced, the night Thomas had needed help, and no one could reach them in time. Before fear could root her to the floor, Martha grabbed her coat, wrapped her scarf tightly around her neck, and opened the front door. The wind nearly knocked her backward, but she stepped onto the porch and waved her lantern. The bikers noticed the light first. Then they noticed her. They approached cautiously, boots crunching through deep snow. Their leader, a tall man with a thick gray beard peeking from under his helmet, removed his gloves and spoke gently, explaining that they had been riding through the mountains when the storm hit faster than expected. The road ahead was completely blocked, and turning back was impossible. Martha looked at their frost-covered jackets and trembling hands. Without overthinking it, she invited them inside. Her home was small, one living room, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms, but warmth filled it quickly once the door shut behind them. Snow melted from their boots, forming puddles on the wooden floor. The air carried the scent of leather, gasoline, and cold wind. Some of the men looked uncomfortable, unsure where to stand. One of them carefully removed his helmet, revealing tired eyes and a scar across his cheek. Another clutched his hands together, trying to restore circulation. Martha moved with quiet authority. She handed out towels, placed extra logs in the fireplace, and ladled soup into mismatched bowls. She found spare blankets stored away for guests who had not come in years. The bikers hesitated at first, as though unaccustomed to such gentleness, but hunger and exhaustion overcame pride. As they ate, the room softened. Helmets came off. Gloves were laid aside. Heavy jackets were unzipped. Underneath the tough exteriors were ordinary faces, young and old, some barely in their 20s, others old enough to have grandchildren. One man revealed he was a mechanic. Another mentioned he worked construction. The bearded leader shared that they were part of a riding club that traveled each winter to deliver donated toys to children in remote towns. The storm had caught them on their return journey. Martha felt her eyes sting. She had expected recklessness. Instead, she found generosity. Still, the challenges were real. 15 men in a tiny house meant cramped quarters. They took turns sitting near the fire while others rested against walls. The power finally gave out near midnight, plunging the house into darkness except for the glow of the fireplace and a few candles Martha kept for emergencies. The temperature outside continued to drop dangerously low. Martha gave up her own bed to the youngest rider, whose lips had turned pale from the cold. She insisted she was comfortable in her rocking chair. When one of the men tried to protest, she simply smiled and told him she had raised 3 sons and knew how to handle stubborn boys. Through the long night, she moved quietly among them, checking blankets, adding wood to the fire, making sure no one's shivering grew worse. At one point, she sat beside the bearded leader, who stared into the flames with distant eyes. He admitted, in a voice heavy with regret, that many people judged them on sight. They were used to being turned away from diners and gas stations. No one had ever opened their home like this. Martha listened without interruption. She understood what it meant to be underestimated. After Thomas passed, some people assumed she was fragile, incapable. Yet here she was, keeping 15 grown men warm in the middle of a blizzard. By dawn, the storm had calmed. Silence replaced the wind's fury. Pale sunlight filtered through icy windows, revealing a world transformed into shimmering white. The bikers stirred one by one, stiff but alive. They stepped outside to assess the damage. The road was buried but passable with effort. They spent hours digging their motorcycles free, clearing snow from tires and engines. Martha watched from her porch, wrapped in her shawl, feeling both relieved and strangely lonely at the thought of them leaving. Before departing, the bearded leader approached her with something folded in his hand, a thick envelope of cash collected among the group as thanks. Martha shook her head firmly. She told him that kindness was not a transaction. If he truly wanted to repay her, he should help someone else when the chance came. The men nodded, deeply moved. Engines roared back to life, and one by one, they rode down the snow-covered road, disappearing beyond the hills. Martha returned inside to clean up melted snow and empty bowls. The house felt larger, quieter. She assumed the night would become just another story she told herself during long winters. But the next morning, she woke to a thunderous rumble that shook her windows. At first, she feared another storm. Then she heard it clearly, dozens of engines, not 15, but many more. She stepped onto her porch and gasped. The entire road leading to her house was lined with motorcycles, not 15, but nearly 100. Chrome gleamed under the bright winter sun. Riders stood respectfully in rows, removing helmets as she appeared. Some carried wooden planks, others toolboxes, bags of groceries, boxes wrapped in colorful paper. The bearded leader walked forward, his eyes bright. Word had spread across their riding community overnight. They had shared her story, how an elderly widow had risked everything to shelter them during the storm. Riders from neighboring towns had gathered before dawn. They had not come for spectacle. They had come with purpose. Martha's porch steps were uneven and rotting. Her roof had leaked for years. The fence around her small garden had collapsed last spring. She had never complained, never asked for help. Within hours, the quiet property transformed into a whirlwind of coordinated effort. Some repaired shingles. Others reinforced the porch. A group replaced broken window seals. Several riders stocked her pantry with enough supplies to last the winter. One even arranged for a generator to be installed so she would never again sit in darkness during a storm. Townspeople, drawn by the noise, gathered at a distance in stunned silence. The same men they had once judged were rebuilding a widow's home without asking for recognition. Martha stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down her face as strangers worked tirelessly, laughing, hammering, carrying wood through snow. The youngest rider, the one who had slept in her bed, gently handed her a small wooden sign they had carved that morning. It read, "Kindness lives here." By sunset, her cottage looked renewed. Stronger. Safer. The bikers formed a line once more, engines ready. But before they left, the bearded leader placed something else in her hands, a framed photograph taken that day, showing her standing among them, wrapped in her shawl, surrounded by 100 motorcycles. He told her she had reminded them who they were. As the last engine faded into the distance, Pine Ridge felt different. Neighbors approached her home for the first time in years, offering pies, warm hugs, apologies for past assumptions. The story traveled beyond the town, beyond the mountains. Martha returned to her porch, now sturdy beneath her feet, and watched the sunset paint the snow in soft shades of pink and gold. Her life had been quiet for so long, defined by loss and solitude. Yet in one fearless act of compassion, she had ignited something far greater than she ever imagined. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something heartfelt. If Martha's courage and those riders' gratitude touched your heart even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading stories that matter. And right now, comment the word kindness below if you believe small acts can create big miracles. The winter would return again next year, as it always did. Storms would rage, winds would howl. But inside that once lonely cottage at the edge of Pine Ridge, warmth would never feel scarce again. Because sometimes, all it takes is one open door in the middle of a storm to remind the world that goodness is not gone, it is simply waiting for someone brave enough to let it in.